Everything you think you know about the world economy might be wrong. They say there is a crisis. A crisis is something temporary. But what we are living through does not pass. Interest rates rise, the problem does not disappear. Interest rates fall, relief does not come. Money is printed, markets breathe for a moment, then tighten even harder. Every attempt at a solution works less than the one before it. Is this a coincidence? Or is this not a crisis at all? This is the economy, contracting uncontrollably. Imagine a body. The nervous system is damaged. The muscles have lost their connection to the brain. They do not know when to contract. They do not know when to relax. They only react. That is exactly what the global economy looks like right now. The world is experiencing an economic spasm, ecospasm, the system losing its own rhythm, losing coordination, contracting from every direction at the same time. And if you think this is only an economic problem, you are mistaken. This is a civilizational problem. The person who introduced this concept was not a trader, not a central bank employee. It was said by American futurist Alvin Toffler. While everyone was still talking about limitless growth, he wrote in his book, The Crash of the Economy, what we are experiencing is not a downturn. It is the ecospasm of industrial civilization. He chose this word very deliberately, because a downturn passes. But a spasm is a loss of control. Now we arrive at the real question. If this is not a crisis, and if this is not a temporary wave, then what exactly are we living through? To understand this, we must first abandon the reflex everyone falls into. Let's remember 1929. It began in the United States, in New York, on Wall Street. Throughout the 1920s, there was extraordinary optimism in America. Industrial production was rising. Automobile factories were expanding. Electricity was spreading rapidly. Radios were entering homes. The future looked bright. But much of this growth was not based on real production. It was based on debt. People borrowed money to buy stocks. Banks eagerly provided these loans. Everyone believed prices would rise forever. In October 1929, that belief suddenly collapsed. Stock prices fell, panic spread, people tried to sell all their shares at the same time. The stock market crashed. But the real destruction did not happen that day. It came when banks started to fail. The loans they had given were not being repaid. When banks collapsed, people lost their savings. Credit stopped. Businesses could no longer invest. Factories shut down. Unemployment reached millions, and it did not remain limited to the United States. Loans flowing from America to Europe were cut off. Germany collapsed. Austrian banks failed. Britain struggled. Countries restricted trade. Tariff walls rose. 1929 quickly turned into a global Great Depression. But one thing was very clear at that time. There were goods, there was production, warehouses were full, but there was no demand. This was a classic overproduction crisis of the industrial age. What we are experiencing today is completely different. Today, shelves look full, but access is expensive. Energy is expensive, food is expensive, housing is expensive. Yet at the same time, money is abundant, debt is abundant, liquidity is abundant. In 1929, there was no money. Today, there is money, but there is no confidence. This is the fundamental difference. 1929 was a collapse. Today, we're inside an ecospasm. The system is contracting from two opposite directions at once. Inflation on one side, stagnation on the other. Under normal conditions, these two cannot coexist for long. But under ecospasm conditions, they do. Because the problem is not prices, the problem is structure. Industrial civilization was built on growth, produce more, consume more, use more energy, borrow more. But every system has a carrying capacity. When that capacity is exceeded, a system does not collapse immediately. First, it trembles. Then it reacts reflexively. Then it loses coordination. Central banks today are trying to suppress exactly this vibration, but the tools they are using belong to an old world. This reminds us of a very similar story from history. After the First World War ended, there was one dominant fear in France, a German attack. Between 1914 and 1918, millions of people had lost their lives. So in the late 1920s, one of the most expensive defense projects in history was launched. The Maginot Line, built along the German border, hundreds of kilometers long, underground tunnels, artillery positions, steel doors, electric rail systems, everything was calculated. The logic was simple. Germany would attack from the same direction again. But when history reached 1940, the German army made a completely different move. Tanks advanced through Belgium. They passed through the Ardennes forest. French generals did not expect a major attack from that direction. The Maginot Line remained intact, but the war had already entered from somewhere else. France fell within 6 weeks. The problem was not weak defenses. The problem was that warfare had changed. The economy today is exactly the same. Central banks adjust interest rates, control money supply, build insurance mechanisms. But all of these were designed for a slow, national, and bounded world. Today, money changes countries with a single click. It changes direction overnight. And some mornings, it simply disappears. The emergence of Eurodollars in the 1970s was the first signal of this transformation. Today, the system is far more advanced. Shadow banking, offshore finance, derivatives. A large portion of money now circulates in invisible spaces. And what is invisible is almost impossible to control. That is why the economy is no longer managed slowly. It reacts. One moment markets surge, the next moment they collapse. That is why the world no longer functions like a production system, but like a casino. In the past, money represented something, a factory, labor, a physical good. Today, money often chases other money. In foreign exchange markets, trillions of dollars change hands every day, but only a very small portion of this is related to real trade. The rest is arbitrage. Interest rate differences, currency differences, timing advantages. This is not a production economy. This is a speed economy. And speed economies do not produce stability. They produce addiction. But the story does not end here. There is a deeper layer. Energy. Because the economy is essentially another name for the flow of energy. To produce something requires energy. To transport something requires energy. To store something requires energy. So the real question is this. How many barrels of oil do we spend to extract 1 barrel of oil? In the past, the answer was clear. You spent 1 barrel and received 50, sometimes even close to 100. Today, the picture is very different. Deep sea drilling, shale oil, complex infrastructures. We now spend more energy to obtain energy. This means the system appears to be working, but its net gain is falling. Like a company whose revenue rises while its profit evaporates. It looks strong from the outside, but it rots from within. This is where the hidden root of inflation lies. But fragility does not end here. Speed and connectivity. On November 8, 1965, electricity went out across the northeastern United States and much of Canada. New York went dark. Ontario went dark. More than 30 million people lost electricity at once. The cause was small, a simple adjustment error at a power station. But the system was so interconnected that this small mistake grew within minutes. When electricity went out, water pumps stopped. Subways froze. People were trapped in elevators. Hospitals switched to generators. Cities stood still for hours. The lesson learned that day was clear. Modern systems can be strong individually, but extremely fragile together. Today, this fragility has multiplied many times over. One bank collapses, credit freezes, companies cannot pay wages, people stop spending, governments borrow more, central banks intervene, a small break grows in waves. And now we reach the most dangerous point. Human psychology. People no longer trust the future. So they consume faster, they borrow more, they invest more aggressively. These behaviors are not rational, but they are widespread. Because when people see tomorrow as uncertain, they attack today. This psychology does not calm the economy. On the contrary, it accelerates it. And acceleration increases fragility. That is why today economic problems turn into social problems. Social problems turn into political crises. And political crises push the economy even harder. This is not a vicious cycle. This is a transition shock. Now let us ask the final question. If this system is incompatible with energy, with money, with speed, with human psychology, should we try to repair it? Or should we accept that it has reached its end? The answer is disturbing, but it is also clear. This is not a crisis. This is an ecospasm. And this is the economic face of a civilizational shift. For those who see this, nothing looks the same anymore.